welcome everyone. Hopefully you've had a great week so far. Thank you for joining today's session on 4 ways to supercharge your forms. My name is Barrett Johannesson, and I'll be your host today and fielding all the questions for your presenter, Jonathan Sue. So we have our Form Builder recertification and Form Builder certification sessions coming up. The first is the recertification. So if you were certified sometime in 2016, I would suggest joining that May recertification session. It is half the price and half the cost, and with that, you get to keep your certification active as well as be exposed to additional ways to enhance your forms with more page-level JavaScript, as well as going through the newer Form Builder interface. The Form Builder certification in June will be June 20th, 21st, and 22nd, and so that's a 3-day session. And with that, we really go and dive deeply into form building and how to build forms in a successful manner and deploy them in a successful manner. Another exciting update that we have is within the Xerion Web Services world. Xerion Documents was released this last week. And so if you're somebody who's looking to automate your workflow and you're sick and tired of copying and pasting data from one source into another to then create a PDF, a Word doc, or other types of docs, you can actually automate that process using Xerion Documents and Xerion Web Services. If you don't currently have a Xerion Web Service account and you're interested in getting a demo, feel free to let me know in the question area in the chat box, and we'll make sure that someone on our sales team is in touch with you to talk through that. Moving forward, we have 3 upcoming webinars in May. The first is next Tuesday. We'll be doing our first Transformation Tuesday session. Be in the lookout in your email for some notifications coming through about that. That'll be the first time that we do it, and John will really dive deeply into some scenarios that some of our users have and walk through how to go about it in the best way with Xerion Web Services. On the 10th, we have Unlocking the New Form Builder. So for those of you who have been continually using the classic form builder, this is definitely a session that you want to join and really see the value and kind of get a deeper understanding of where everything is and how to truly take advantage of the new form builder interface. And on the 31st of May, we have Saving Time with Data Flow Automation, where we'll really automate your process and show you how to truly save time and money through that Xerion web service. Before I hand this over to John, we're going to launch 2 polls for you. The first one is our normal one, just asking if you're a current user. Before I fully hand it over, let's do one more poll here. And this one's just, so I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And at this point, John, I'm just going to hand it over to you. And I can't wait to see and learn how to supercharge my form.
Thanks, Barrett, and good afternoon, everybody. So before I get into it, I do want to cover a couple of things regarding the webinar. The first thing is, as always, we're going to be releasing the recording of the webinar in 48 hours after this, as well as all of the resources that I'm going to present to you today. Additionally, anyone who is on the attendees list is going to be included in Xerion Academy if you are not already. That's going to be important because we are going to begin hosting some web content specifically on Xerion Academy. So through attending this, you will have a username. If anyone in your organization does not have a username already, be sure to let them know that they're able to request one on the website if they need. Now, moving into the webinar, what I wanted to do today was talk about a couple of different ways that you can enhance your forms and your data collection. I reflected a little bit on some of the techniques that I don't see used very often when I go through forms, and then other things that I think bring a lot of value to your form building. So I wanted to have a balance of things that are sometimes overlooked, and then other things that are really going to be critical and will really help enhance your data collection. So the 4 things we're going to be going over today is we're going to begin with talking about reference IDs. The second thing we'll talk about are setting up optionless icons, and actually as a more broad topic, we'll just talk about getting images into your form. The third one we'll discuss is working with your Smart Table Search and ways to enhance that Smart Table Search feature. And then finally, we're going to talk about parsing location data. And so again, the reference IDs and the form images are something that I wanted to go over as something that I don't see as often as I would like, while the smart table search enhancements and then working with location data are things that I think are critical to any person working with forms that use either of those smart controls. So let's start by talking about our reference IDs. And specifically what we're going to be going over today are the page level reference IDs. Now, your reference IDs are going to be focused on modifying the default behaviors of the app. In this case, because we're talking about page level reference IDs, we're going to be talking about the ones that affect the form as a whole rather than element level reference IDs, which are going to affect the individual element. So as I said, reference IDs are a library of settings and flags used to alter the behavior and appearance of a form or element. Now there's two types of reference IDs that I like to categorize. The first one is a setting, and I consider that any type of a reference ID that's going to require additional information or an additional value. So you're setting a value to that reference ID. That's going to be different than a flag, which is going to be a reference ID that you just have to explicitly type out. It doesn't require any additional information, but it's going to denote a change in the behavior. So there's two types of reference IDs. You're going to have page level reference IDs, and these affect how the form appears and behaves. They're configured in the form settings. Your element reference IDs are going to affect individual elements as you put in the IDs, and these are going to be configured in the element properties section. Now what I wanted to do first was go ahead and show you where to find each one of these. So I'm going to log into a test environment of mine. I'm going to open up my form builder. Now from here, if I go in the upper right corner and I click on the edit properties of a form, most of you are probably very familiar with this top section as you fill out your label and your table name. Now if I scroll down here, you're going to see this section of reference IDs, and these are our page level reference IDs. Now you'll see that there are 5 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Each one of them have a different responsibility, which we're going to go over during this webinar. Now if I look at an individual element and I scroll down here in the properties, I get towards the bottom, you'll notice that there's going to be a reference ID section here, and this is where you would enter in an element reference ID. So I just wanted to go ahead and show everybody where you can find these properties. And now let's dive a little bit deeper into each one of them. So I wanted to give everyone a brief overview of the 5 reference IDs you can find at the page level to begin with. So reference ID 1 is going to focus on modifying the way the form interacts with the user. As a side note, it also will affect the way you can set up your form if you're running it with iForm Kiosk. And for more information on that, when I release these slide notes, there will be links for these as articles to the Customer Success Center. The second reference ID 2, is going to focus on the way your subform records are displayed in the subform table. And so for those of you who are familiar with filling out the app or with building forms, as you enter in subform records, you're going to have a small summary table shown, whether it is in the separate view or in the inline view. Either way, you're able to configure how that table is shown through the second reference ID. The third reference ID is going to be where you can customize the form details. When you're on the home screen of your app, there will be a small little eye icon for information, and you're able to customize that further at that section. The fourth reference ID is where you will be able to override the delete on upload device setting. And I'll talk about what that device setting is when we get there, and then how this reference ID interacts with that. And then finally, the fifth reference ID is where you'll be able to adjust your form coloring. This is going to make that home screen of your app a little bit easier to read, especially if you have a lot of forms on there. A lot of times changing the colors will be able to help draw your eye to certain groups of forms or a specific form that you're going to be filling out quite frequently. So we'll start by talking about reference ID 1, and this is going to be the reference ID that really has the most meat to it. There's a lot of things you can do with this reference ID. I don't want to spend time going through every single one of these, but I did want to pick a couple of highlights for you. So one of the really cool ones is this one, 3 from the bottom here, the PDF subform _ new page. Now, if you were to set this as a reference ID flag in your page level reference IDs, what would happen is in the PDF report, each subform, instead of showing inline as one large table, would get its own new page. So if you have very lengthy subforms and you want to separate that out, whether it's for clarity of reading or because you want to be able to take that one sheet and extract it from the full record, you're able to do that using this reference ID. Another reference ID I wanted to highlight was the page type info reference ID. And again, this is going to be a flag where if you set this, then it's not going to allow you to create a new record and to submit data. This is going to be used almost as like an informative form. If you want to have information on the form for the user to be able to read, use that form for reference. By setting this reference ID, you'll be able to make sure that they're not submitting records. And I know another one that I've used recently has been this page type single submission. And this is a pretty cool one because it's going to limit the number of records you can submit per that form. And again, these are all just ways how you're able to limit and modify the way the user is going to interact with the app and with their forms. And again, also, all of these reference IDs, because they're at the page level, they're not going to affect the entire app. So it's not going to affect all of your forms, only the forms which have these reference IDs set to them. Before I move on, Barrett, I did want to check in real quickly to see if there are any questions.
Not at this time. Everyone's seems to be doing pretty well.
Okay, very cool. Moving on to the second reference ID. This is the reference ID again that is going to focus on the display of this subform summary table is the way I like to describe it. And so what I have here is a screenshot where I filled out 3 subform records for this form, and then you'll see it shown in this small grid. And what you're able to do is you're able to change the columns that are going to be displayed here, as well as the order in which the records are shown. So the 2 settings that you're going to have for this reference ID are, one, the display order, and then the other one is going to be the sort order. And then these are going to control the columns and the rows respectively. Now, when I go into my form, what you'll see is each of these elements is going to have a sort ID, and this starts at 0, 1, 2, 3, and it counts down. Now, by default, the subform summary table is going to show the first 3 columns, but sometimes those may not be the columns you want to show, and so you're able to alter that by using the display order. In the case of this form, what I ended up doing was I ended up wanting to have the first column shown, which is this one, but then I set the display order to show columns 2 and 3, skipping column number 1, or sort order 1. And so that's a way to get this table to be more informative, and you can get a quick snapshot of the data that was critical that you collected. A lot of the times what I'll do is if I have fields in my form that are doing calculations based on my values, I will have those be the ones that are shown here, even though they're at the bottom of my form. Moving on to the sort order, if you set the sort order in the same fashion where you're going to specify the index value of each element that you want shown, it will prioritize sorting based on that element. Now what will happen is, for example, if you want to sort this ascending or descending, if you want it ascending, you'll just have to specify that column, or that sort order rather, so 0, 1, 2, or 3, etc. If you wanted it to be sorted descending, in addition to the sort ID, you would also want to add an uppercase D to the end of it. So if I wanted to have this sorted by my second column, I would say sort order equals 1. If I wanted this to be descending, I would say 1D. Now, if I specify a second column, then what would happen is the subforms would be primarily sorted by this first one, and as a secondary sort, you would see this column be done afterwards. And as a side note, I do want to make sure and highlight that when you are setting the reference IDs for this, make sure to set that reference ID on the child form. So you want to specify on the child forms page level reference IDs. That's where you're going to go ahead and put these reference IDs in, not on the parent form. The next reference ID I wanted to go over was the reference ID number 3, which is going to show you the, it'll customize the info section for your forms when you click on that. And real quickly, let me go over to my device here and show you exactly what I mean. So if I open up a form and I click on the this icon right here, what you'll see is it'll open up some details, and then from here I can go further in and it'll show me information here. So what you can do is in these properties, you're able to customize what is shown. And what I have here at the top is a table of the default properties that you're able to list here. And so if I wanted to have the version as well as the modified date, which is what I just showed you, I would type it out this way. Now, one of the other really cool things is inside of this, you can set up some custom properties. So if I'm going to do this, I'm going to say custom property list instead of my property list. I can still use the default values as shown above, but then I'm also able to add custom information here. So this would be the heading, and then this would be the value. This would be the second heading. This would be the second value. And this can be really useful if you want to add additional information, such as contact information for a form. If a certain person is in charge of that form and you want to be able to have their information on it so that you know who to contact if something goes wrong, you can do that. If you want to have additional resources for that form, you can also put a URL in there as well, and it will be associated with that form and they can get to it by pressing that info button.
Now, I just want to ask, because we have someone with their hand up, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the call, if you put your hand up, I'd be happy to unmute you, but I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't an accident. And it looks as though that person put their hand down, so go ahead, John.
Awesome. So our fourth reference ID is going to be the flag that you can set to override the delete on upload synchronization setting. So before we go over this, I do want to talk about what that synchronization setting is. So as you're collecting records on your form or on your device, if delete on upload is enabled, what will happen is each time that completed record is synced to the cloud, it would delete from your local device. Now, if you have this disabled, then you would have a local copy stored for you to refer to later on. Now, there's pros and cons to however you want this set up. That's going to depend on your own particular use case. But what's great about this fourth reference ID is you're actually able to override the device setting on a per form basis using this. So if you set the flag record delete on upload, then regardless of the synchronization setting, that form's records will always be deleted when synced. Now, this is going to be really useful when you have a form that has sensitive data and you want to make sure that that user cannot maintain a local copy of that record. Conversely, if you set the flag for record no delete on upload here, then every record will be saved on the device. This can be useful with this page type new from last record reference ID, and I will jump back to my reference ID 1 because that's where this is from. And so with this reference ID, you're able to pre-populate field data from the last submitted record in a new record. So what that means is if I fill out record number 1, submit it, and then I go to open up a new record, then it would be pre-populated with what I filled out the first time. This can be useful if you need to make amendments, if you're taking the same type of readings or you're looking for plus minus type things where you want the previous values. This is a great way to have that auto-populated. The only thing is, obviously, you need to have that local record for it to populate. And so in order to make sure this functionality will always work, you want to explicitly set this to record no delete on upload for that form. Now, my fifth reference ID is going to be involved with the aesthetics of the home screen. Now, going back over here to my device, You'll notice that all of the forms have all of the same branding, the same coloring, and so what will happen is eventually, as I get more and more forms, it can be difficult to find the forms I want. Now you'll notice I have an icon over here for this form that I'm going to be using today, and that can be really helpful. But sometimes we want to brand it even further. We want to get some colors in there, and we want to change up the coloring so that it'll catch your eye a little bit more. So you have 5 different reference IDs within Reference ID 5 that you can use to customize the coloring of all the different elements inside of that form window. So we'll start from the upper left. If you want to customize the label color, which means the text here, you're able to do that using form branding underscore form label color. If you want to modify the status record icons, you can do that using the record status color. And again, form branding underscore is going to be the prefix for all of these reference IDs. Continuing on clockwise, if you use form branding info text color, that is going to change the color of the little eye right here, the circle icon. And so that can be another way to differentiate forms between one another. The info bar color is actually this triangle right here. So again, that is going to be separate from this border color, which is this line right at the bottom. I know it can be hard to see on my screen, but there's a small faint green line at the bottom of this form. And so that's the difference between your border color and your info bar color. Now, the values you're going to put for each of these settings are going to be 6-digit hexadecimal colors. And if those of you who are not familiar with this, I do have a resource set up for you where you're able to pick colors and it will give you the hex value down here. Now you want to be careful. I know this website uses lowercase letters here, but as a general rule, I tend to make all of the hex values uppercase just for consistency. Sometimes the lowercase will work in different platforms, but having it uppercase all the time is a safe way to make sure that it will always work. Okay, and those are the 5 reference IDs that you will be able to use at the page level. Again, these are things that I know for me as I'm building out forms, a lot of times I overlook them. And I definitely see when customers come and speak with me about how they can enhance their forms, a lot of times these reference IDs will be able to accomplish the types of needs that you're looking for. And so I wanted to bring some attention to them during this webinar.
So John, there's a couple questions coming in. One is asking if you could actually show an example of what it would look like using the form branding and using more than one of these.
Sure.
So what the actual statements look like.
Let me go ahead and take this one and I'm going to add it to my form. So from here, let's go through this. We'll go into the properties of my form. I'm going to scroll down here to this 5th reference ID. I'm going to paste in the reference ID I want to use. I'm going to use an equal sign, and I'm going to go ahead and set the color I want. Now, I'm just going to pick a color randomly. I'm going to use I'll just make it red. So I'm going to do this. And now to separate these, I'm going to use a semicolon as I grab another one of these values. So let me go ahead and grab the info bar color equals, and I'm going to set this to red as well. From here, I can save these changes. And let me go ahead and sync my device.
And while you're syncing, there was another question that I just thought it'd be helpful if everyone heard the response to.
Sure.
The question was, there's 5 reference IDs that you just went through. Do you have to use the reference IDs with that specified reference ID number? For instance, could I use record delete on upload in reference ID 1, or do I have to use it in the specified one? And you always have to use it in the specified one that John went through, otherwise those functionalities will not work. Another thing that I want to note here is that there are additional reference IDs, as some of them would be used for integrations with like the Zebra printer or other pieces of hardware, as well as if you're using the iForm kiosk app. And that's all the questions for now.
Awesome. So I went ahead and synced my device after I made those changes to the form, and you'll see how the text of the form name has changed now, as well as the bar color here. And so that's a good way to go ahead and modify that. And again, I just want to go over the syntax where I'm taking the reference ID name with an equal sign afterwards. And then in this case, I'm using the hex value for the color. So the hex value always starts with the pound symbol, and then it's going to be 6 digits afterwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you haven't worked with these before, just so you know, the colors are going to be a combination of red, green, and blue. And so these first two characters represent the amount of red, the amount of green, and the amount of blue. 0 is going to be completely empty. It works up to 9. After 9, the next value is actually A, and then F is the full amount. So this is full red with no green and no blue, which is why we get the color that we have over here.
And just a little snippet from my experience if you plan on having one project with all of the same colors in Reference ID 5, the easiest way to do that is actually when you're in the new form builder interface and you're seeing your list of forms, you can choose to see Reference ID 5, and then you can just copy and paste the text from one to all the other forms you need to at a very quickly pace, essentially.
Yeah, let me go ahead and show everyone that actually, because I do like that view. So if I jump out here into my forms, what you're able to do is in this table view, you're actually able to specify reference IDs. So let me not clutter this too much. We'll just go to reference ID 5. And so what I'll have here is the value I have for this form that I just filled out. And if I wanted to extend that to another form, whoops. Okay, let's see here. Do this. It looks like it's not letting me edit it right now. It's pulling me back in there.
You can edit it, just you have to click the little button on the side instead.
Oh, my mistake. That's correct. All right, so let's do this. Let's get our reference ID back. So if we're clicking this, there we go. So by clicking on this properties icon or the edit icon, I can now go in here. I would be able to select all of this, copy it, and apply it to a different form very easily. And I can just save this here. Okay, that's actually a really good tip, Barrett. Thanks for sharing that with us. All right. So I wanted to move on now to the next way we can enhance our forms, and I wanted to talk about improving the aesthetics of your form. Now, before I go ahead and talk about this, I did want to go ahead show you all this form that I have for the webinar today. Now I've got a couple of things on this form that I think are pretty cool. To start off with, I obviously have this big Xerion logo at the top. Now, if you're doing a data collection piece, I probably wouldn't have a logo that large. I just wanted to make the picture nice and big for the purposes of this webinar so you could see it today. Another thing is I have down here, this may not look very familiar, but this is actually a select element here where it's asking me what my favorite web service is, and I can choose the one I want here. So this is a select element. And then finally, what I want to show was a multi-select here where I can choose, and a pick list would also show similarly. So I have images not only in my form at the top with the Xerion logo, but I can have images in my option list as well. And so these are the things we're going to be going through. Now what I wanted to do for this section is I wanted to talk about how I accomplished setting this up. The benefit or the value of it I think is pretty apparent in terms of making your form look a little bit more engaging. It'll be a little bit easier for the user to fill it out as well. So in order to include images in your form, what I did was I set up a Dropbox media configuration. And so in order to do that, from here on the company level, I went to my company info, and at the bottom, I was able to set up a media configuration where I linked my Dropbox account to it. Now, once I did that, inside of my Dropbox account, I went ahead and made a folder that I called, I believe, iForm Images. But the important thing to note is that you're going to reference your Dropbox account in any URL schema by saying Dropbox : / into whatever folder structure you have set up. Once you have your folder set up, once you've done your account linking, the next thing you want to do is get the images ready to be uploaded to Dropbox. And so a couple of considerations you want to make sure to be aware of. The first one is that whether your image is going to be on the form or in an option list, it has to be a PNG file. So make sure that you have it as the correct file. The second thing is the way the app knows which image to pull from the folder is based on either the data column name, which is going to be for a form level image, or by the key value if you're using this within an option list. And so you want to make sure that your key values match the file name. So if I have a key value of ZIM, then I would want the corresponding image to be zim.png. Conversely, if I have an image label, which is the element I use to show the image on the form, and the data column name is Zarian logo, then the file name should be zarianlogo.png. After you have your images uploaded and set up in your Dropbox account, the next thing you're going to want to do is make that connection in the folder structure to reference the Dropbox. So if you want to use form icons, so at the page level, under form properties, you can go to form icons URL, and I'll show you where that is. So when I go into my form builder, in the properties down here, you'll see I have a label icons URL. And again, this is my Dropbox : / and it looks like I named the folder form images. So I'm going to put that there, and then this data column name for my image label element must match the file name .png inside of that folder. For option lists, inside the option list properties, you're able to add that folder reference under the option icons. Let me go ahead and show you that. So if I go into my option list manager, and I search for the correct option list, you'll see here how I have these key values set up, and these are going to be named simply so that my file names are going to be easy as well. In the properties of this option list, you'll see for the option icons, I have the same structure, Dropbox : / and then form images. So the images for my form as well as the option list all reside in the same folder actually. I was just very careful to make sure there was no overlap in the images. Now the last thing I want to say about this is you want to make sure that you're really careful about the size of your images. So when you're working with a multi-select or a pick list, the images are very small. And so you want to make sure that your icon sizes are, I believe I set these to being 45 pixels. You don't want them to be any larger than that because otherwise they won't display correctly or they may not display at all. For my select element here at the top, these are actually the same images, but you'll notice they're a little bit blurry because they're getting blown up. I believe you don't want these to be any bigger than 100 or 130 pixels, I think was the limit. And so make sure that these images are a smaller size for the option list. For the image label, they can be a little bit larger, obviously, but you don't want to have your image be too big because you're very quickly going to reach a point where it is detracting from the usability of the form because you're not able to see as much on the screen. Barrett, I want to check in. Are there any questions that people have asked that I'd be able to answer?
I think at this time we're doing pretty good. I'll let you know if anything comes up.
Great. And just for reference, and then you'll see these in the slides as well, but I'll also be attaching the form package with the materials for this webinar, but I did have a couple of screenshots just to include so you can see what it looks like in your form. All right, moving on to Smart Table Search, we're going to talk about ways to trigger that lookup table. But before we do that, let's go ahead and introduce what a Smart Table Search is. So for anyone who may not be familiar with Smart Table Search, it's a mechanism that's going to allow you to take a set of local records. So these are records that are downloaded to your device, and you can use them as a lookup table, almost like a local database. The intention here is that you'll take one point of data from the lookup records, and then you will grab that entire record and you can pre-populate other form elements. What's really great about this is you're able to pick from predefined values. You're also able to leverage your existing data. So as you're collecting records, or if you have existing records like an inventory list, you can make use of that to make sure that your data integrity is going to have a higher level. And then you will also minimize the amount of data entry because as you pick that one value, the other ones will auto-populate afterwards. Now, Smart Table Searches are really great, but they do have some limitations to them. This first challenge I wanted to pose was the fact that you cannot have a smart table search that will just execute automatically when the form opens, right? So we're talking about having a default lookup. Basically what happens is you need to have some sort of a trigger inside of the form that would initiate or execute that smart table search. It just doesn't happen at the initiation of the form. So in order to do that, what we ended up doing on this form is I went and added a select element to trigger the smart table's default value. And so if we look over here on my form, this right here where it says start is actually a select element, but there's only one value in the option list, so it appears as a large button. When I press it, it's going to fill in my smart table search down below where it gives me a default username, and then it's going to query and pull this other value from those local records. Now here is the text I have for that dynamic value. And I wanted to break this apart for us and talk about what is going on here. To start off with, I have an if statement. So that means that my dynamic value is going to be one of two things depending on this condition. And my condition is that start trigger, which is the name of my select element, is equal to 0. Now, when you have a select, when it is not chosen yet or when it has just been loaded, this actually has a value of -1. Now from there, the first option would then have a sort order of 0, the next one would have a sort order of 1 and 2 and then 3. This is called having an index that is 0 based. So the first value has an index of 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. So because there's only one button, if I press it, that means that the sort order or the index value would be equal to 0. So if this is true, meaning that I press the button, I'm going to set first name, which is actually my username field here, to iFormBuilder.username. And this is a built-in function that's allowed within iFormBuilder. And so that's going to grab the username that's logged into this device and populate that text area, or I'm sorry, that text element. Now, if this is not filled in, then first name, that element, is going to end up with an empty string. And so you can see that behavior here, where if it's filled in, you get webinar, and if it's not, you'll see that username is empty. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into this form structure. You'll see here I have this start the form button with start trigger. And then down here, I just have a dynamic value where I'm setting this to a default of -1. This is useful because sometimes you run into issues where you're caching values from previous records. And so all I want to do is give this element a default starting value. Now down here, I have this username element where I have the dynamic value I showed you earlier. What I wanted to do is go down and look at this smart table search. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is that to set up a smart table search, you have to use a text element. Okay? Now, once I have a text element, you're going to have this property on the right-hand side that you're able to set up. And I would do this by assigning a lookup. And what I'm going to be able to do is choose a form that I want to use. In this case, the form is called users. And then in here, it's going to look for and return the different elements in this form. And so in this case, I wanted to choose this based on username. And so if I select this, you'll see that the table name and the column name are set. Now, if I want to clear the lookup, I can do that. So I can choose a new table to use as the lookup values. The last piece we'll talk about is this title. And so in order to access the title value from that record, what I'm doing is under the dynamic value, I'm going to use the name of my lookup table, users, dot, and then the data column name of the value I want, which is title. And so this is how this element is going to pre-populate. I can actually make this element, instead of a text, I could make this a read-only so that it is not editable. That wouldn't impact the speed of the data collection at all, but what it would let you do is it would make sure that you cannot alter that value after it's been populated into that element. And then finally, I did want to make note that I'm doing a quick condition value here on my username element, first name, to make sure that the length is greater than 0. So that's why that element was hidden at first, and then it showed afterwards. And I can show that behavior one last time when I'm in here. When I press start, it's going to trigger the smart table search. It will populate username, and then title will be populated as well and shown. Now, as a quick bonus, I also did want to talk about using your smart table search in tandem with scanning elements or any of your hardware elements. Now, this is going to really save you a lot of time because the way the smart table search works, if I were to not use that button, if I go back over here and I enter in this, it's going to work in one of two ways. Now, right now, it's going to allow me to type in my character string here. So if I were to put something else in, make sure this is lowercase, it would do another lookup that way. This is actually the old behavior and it's no longer the default. The reason it's behaving this way is because if I look at my form structure, I have this reference ID, an element level reference ID of disable list set up. If I were to take this out, let me go ahead and save and sync this form. Uh-oh, I think I have an error somewhere. But if I were to sync this form and I were to run that lookup again, what would end up happening is it would actually operate like a pick list, which is, in my opinion, a lot nicer. It's going to give you the ability to choose only records that you know exist in there, so you don't have to worry about typing it incorrectly. But if you have a long list of records, a pick list is also not going to be time efficient. It's not going to be very quick. At that point, what I would recommend doing is actually setting up some sort of a scanning mechanism. And you can do that using a variety of the different elements we offer. The one I tend to use the most is the ManateeWorks element to create QR codes. And it's important to note that creating QR codes or creating barcodes is really not actually that complicated of a process. Understand that that barcode breaks down into normally a string of numbers, sometimes of characters. And what you can do is you can create those strings and then generate a barcode from it. Once you have that image, then you can put that on whatever data collection point you want. And when you scan it, you can access the raw data by using the data column name of the hardware scanning element, .raw. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you the text that's captured from that barcode or from that QR code. And you can then use that text to trigger your lookup table like we did with the select element. So what this is going to allow you to do is you can have a barcode generated for unique items, whether that is an employee ID card or for an inventory item. You would scan that barcode, capture the raw data from it, and use that raw data to do your lookup table. And then that can populate as many fields as you have for that item or for that entity with the barcode. Barrett, just checking in again real quickly. Are there any questions from anybody?
There have been lots of questions coming in and I've been answering them. So I think everybody's good for the most part.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the fourth and final way that we're going to be enhancing and supercharging our forms. And this one was really something that I felt was critical to making sure that you get the most out of your data collection and you make your life as easy as possible when you're doing your form building. So this may not necessarily be a way to supercharge your form, but I definitely think that it is a critical component when you're building out your forms, specifically working with the location element. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at how to parse out complex data structures. And we're going to do this through the lens of our location element. Now, for those of you who are unaware, let me go ahead and just show you what the location element looks like. I have one at the very bottom of this form. Now, if I enter into this element, it's going to use the device's GPS to grab these pieces of information. And if I refresh this, it would just refresh the information on here. When I press done, it's going to capture all this information. But the problem is all this information is effectively in one data point. and it makes it difficult for me to get to a single value. So what I've done is, now you'll see that there is a second element down below that is shown. I've gone and parsed out values from this location element. Specifically, I wanted to parse out the latitude and the longitude. Now, if this syntax is a little confusing to you, you may not be familiar with working in the JSON data structure. And so I also wanted to take this opportunity to introduce that as well. So what I have here is just a blown up version of what is on my device. I've also gone and added some white space, which is the line breaks, to make it a little bit easier to read. So what happens here is inside of this notation, you're going to have what's called a key and then a value. So instead of having this long string of information, I've now broken this into two data points, a latitude and a longitude. Now the reason I did it as a JSON object is because I'm anticipating moving this into another platform, specifically our data flow automation platform, which organizes all the content in JSON. So that was my initial project consideration. I knew where this data was going to go to, so I went ahead and prepared it ahead of time. And let me show you how I did that. So this is my location element, and a couple things I want to make note of is the data column name, which is GPS_location. Now for those of you who may have worked with this before, if I had just the data column name of location, that would not be okay. Location is a reserved word, and that would not allow me to save it. So you have to make sure that the data column name has something else included in it. I also went ahead and made sure to give this a default value, and this is to make sure that my smart controls later on are not going to break or be faulty because that value does not exist. Moving down to my text element, if I look at the dynamic value, I have this long concatenation here, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it in a text editor so we can break it apart a little bit more. So what I've done is, if you look at these plus signs, these are going to be your glue. So I begin with a text string, and it's going to be the curly brace, and I know that the first key I want is the word latitude, and the colon is what separates the key from the value. After that, I'm going to glue together GPS_location dot latitude, and this is how I'm accessing that one value from my location element. So if we remember, the data column name of the element was GPS_location, so then I'm going GPS_location dot latitude, and that is going to give me this value right here. After that, I'm going to glue together a comma, my next key, which is longitude, and a colon, and then I will glue together same data structure, the longitude, so GPS_location dot longitude, and then I'll close it with a curly brace. Ultimately, what that gives me is it gives me this long string here where I've taken these values from my previous element and substituted them into my string. Now, if you don't want to do this in JSON, you can do this in another format. A lot of the times what we'll see is instead of making it this complicated, we'll have just a simple text element. We can call this GPS latitude. And in the dynamic value, I'll reference my original location element and then its latitude property. And so this is just going to be a single data point. And so let me go ahead and resync my device after I've saved that now.
And I do want to say, because this question just came up, they asked about why you have it just latitude. The same way that he did with the JSON, where he concatenated the longitude and latitude into one field, he could do that in this scenario as well.
Yes, and I can go ahead and show that. So what I have here is just one value, right? The latitude. So that's a single one. Now, if I wanted to replicate that, I can do that with the longitude in another text element. So let's go ahead and do the concatenation next. So we'll say GPS lat long. And so we'll do both of them in one element, and we're not going to have all of the JSON syntax. So in this case, it would be GPS location dot latitude. That's my first value. Now the next thing I want to do is concatenate a comma to separate the two values. And then I will glue on the end of this location dot longitude.
And for those of you who use ArcGIS or any other sort of GIS tool, what John is showing is actually how you can format it so that it can directly go into that tool.
Yep, and this is syncing, and as soon as it finishes, we'll take a look. And as we scroll down, I'm going to fill in my location, and you'll see down here I have the latitude and the longitude separated by a comma. And so this is just going to be a matter of taking the values you want and setting up that dynamic value so that it's giving you the string in the format you need for whatever that additional step is going to be. If you want just the value, you can do that. If you're anticipating sending it into something that's going to use a JSON data structure, you can do that. And then if you're integrating with ArcGIS, you can also set up your lat long in the way that it wants as well. Okay. At this point, Barrett, those are the 4 different techniques I wanted to show today. Are there any questions as we start to wrap this up? You may be muted, Barrett.
How did you know I was talking? Yeah, so there was a question about the time, and someone was hoping that they could actually parse out the time from the location element.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to talk through that at all?
Yeah, sure. What you would be able to do is if you wanted to access the time, you can do that as well, and it would be no different than the latitude and the longitude. Now, if you're trying to parse out individual components of the time, you would then need to go in and treat that as a string manipulation. So you can go in there and you would probably want to separate it based on that colon so that you can access the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. Also, if you want to grab the other pieces, you can do that as well. That's a little bit more of an advanced string manipulation, but it certainly is doable. If that's something that you want to take a look at further, we can definitely follow up and give you some information on that.
So I'll go ahead and put the help desk article that we have within the chat, but
Awesome.
As it stands now, there isn't a way to get the time. You can only do the latitude, longitude, altitude, and accuracy with speed.
Oh, really?
And speed, yep.
Oh, interesting.
But that is because we do have different ways for you to capture the time, with the metadata as well as using the time element, which some groups will choose to do it. In addition to capturing the time with the location element.
Yeah, I guess I never actually thought about that. I guess I've never tried to grab the time from that, specifically because of the other elements.
Right.
I thought they would have worked that way. That's unfortunate. Whoops.
I would have hoped as well, but it is unfortunate. And so there's just different ways to work around it.
Definitely.
Now, John, while you were talking, I did create a new poll that I was hoping to share with everybody. So if you're okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll.
Sure.
So the barcode scans, that was a newer one. That's very interesting, as well as the adding images.
That is very interesting. And so, we can definitely go through, and in a future webinar, I think it'll be valuable to take a look at that barcode scan, build out a full solution for people if that's new to them, because that's definitely one of the best ways to save time with your data collection.
And while I have everyone's attention with completing polls, I'm going to launch one other one, which is just what would you like to improve in your data collection efforts? And these are just 3 simple options here. The ease of use of your forms, that you're able to collect data at a faster rate, as well as capturing more complex data. And if it's all of the above, then select all of them. Okay, we almost have everyone's response in, so I'll just give that another second here. And I'll share those results with everyone too. So it's pretty even. I think all 3 of those things are really helpful. So you can definitely see why you'd want that.
Yeah.
All right, John, I'll hand it back to you for the closing.
Okay, thanks, Barrett. And so I just want to go ahead in closing, let everyone know that the recording of this will be made available on Xarian Academy, as well as the form package of the form that I showed to you all, and then these presentation slides. The slides are also going to have some additional links and references to past webinars and help desk articles that will allow you to extend that learning. And then also I do want to urge everyone to fill out the survey and the feedback form at the end of this so that we can get some insight into how we can continue to improve these webinars in the future and bring you all new and exciting content each and every time. Barrett, I'm going to give you one last chance to see if there are any other questions.
No questions here. Just thank you, John, for presenting on different ways for us to supercharge our forms.
All right, and I hope everybody has a good rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you next time.